Hey, Georgi. Um, I'm very grateful that you agreed to take part in this talk that I think will be very interesting given your academic interest in politics and international relations and also your public activities. I think it will be very interesting to listen to your thoughts about overall the current developments globally and in Georgia particularly. I'm more interested in your opinion about the trust. How is it changing in our society given the new realities or new normal, as it is in vogue to call? Because during the pandemic and the many other global events that are going on, and I believe it's not more going on than it has been before. It's just with the new communication, we always get so much information and very often radical information with pictures of coming catastrophes. And I believe even our generation still doesn't know how to deal with it properly. I guess we need to develop new ethics, maybe new regulations that fit more of our reality with dominance of virtual life, with AI innovations, with social media, with communication style that we have now. And I don't know, do you agree overall that we are lacking the trust that we used to have between individuals and maybe between the society and governmental institutions, or it's just my impression? And maybe it's not about strict trust, but just we need to change the style of partnership or relations. So yeah, I would be very happy if you share your thoughts about that and tell more about Georgia.
Thank you, dear Alina. I would like to thank you for this opportunity, as well as the German Marshall Fund of the United States for our ability to record this interview. Well, when we're talking about trust, we always have problems defining what do we mean, because there are different types of trust. There is trust between individuals, between you and me, and probably a person selling cucumbers at the grocery store. There is also a different kind of trust between an individual and the state institutions. And there is also another type of trust, which is trust between those institutions themselves. So when we're talking about these three types of trust, we always need to remember in what specific environment we are talking about. In case of Western Europe, institutions have been developing for hundreds of years. They evolved, they adapted, and they fully reflected and mirrored the expectations and necessities of the people living in those countries. In case of the majority of post-Soviet countries, as well as the majority of post-colonial countries, institutions did not have a chance to be developed for hundreds of years. They were created, and with this creation, the institutions had to fully reflect the spectrum of the societies where they were created to. And this has proven to be an extremely big challenge. Even in Western countries, as you have mentioned during your question, technological revolution, digitalization, creation of social networks, of Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. Now we're also witnessing the big increase in TikTok's fans. With all these new social media networks, it has become obvious that our governmental institutions are far behind, that our institutions are not able to catch up with the situation we have now. And this has proven to be a big problem even for the Western countries, where institutions have historically been built to be much more resilient than those institutions, those fragile institutions that we have in post-Soviet countries. And this is the main problem with trust as well. if institutions do not demonstrate that they are able to face and catch up with current challenges, the trust towards these institutions decreases rapidly. And people have a tendency to believe something that was posted on Facebook by a guy living somewhere far, far away from them, who has no idea, had done no research about specific topics, but this guy has wonderful charisma. This guy is able to talk, to convince, and people are listening to this guy because he or she is not appealing to reason, to scientific knowledge, but to the fears they have. So these people are kind of taking what those people already think and they amplify it. And when we're talking about trust, this way how social media work, how social medias empower such kind of communication, such kind of exchange of ideas is crucial here. Trust is impossible if it is not supported. We cannot speak about trust between state institutions, for example, in post-Soviet countries, because those institutions have not proven themselves as able to respond to the challenges and problems that those societies face. For example, in my own country, institutional building began in late 1990s. In the past, in Georgia, we had a civil war, we had two conflicts in Abkhazia and Tskhinvali, we had Russian aggression, we had all kinds of problems. And we also had the legacy of Soviet institutions that were designed specifically to suppress freedom of thought, freedom of ideas, and also to suppress free will of the people living in the Soviet Union. So when we were facing new institutions, when we were facing the problems we had, it was this legacy of Soviet institutions and the legacy of post-Soviet institutions because they haven't proven to be able to resolve any problems of the people. And when there is a problem with institutions, there is always some underground gray zone. This gray zone attempts to get the functions of those institutions. This gray zone is always trying to get as much power as it can, and then either overthrow current institutional regime or become a part of it. This situation, for example, has been quite vivid in Soviet Union when, besides formal economic system, there was also a huge gray economy where people were able to exchange different goods, and also when they were able to create institutions and systems that were surpassing officially existing institutions. And this is also a problem of trust. When your country is occupied by a foreign force, which happened in the case of Georgia when it was occupied in 1921 by Soviet Russia, Soviet Union started creation of institutions that would support their strengths in the region. There is a wonderful book by Robinson and Ajemoglu, which is called Why Nations Fail. And the authors emphasize importance of extractive and integrative institutions. So in Georgian case, all institutions created by the Soviet Union were mostly extractive. They were not targeting problems of the people, but they were supporting the power of one specific political party, extracting the resources and giving this party full control on all economic or any other sorts of resources. So that's why there was absolutely no trust towards these Soviet-created, Soviet-based occupational institutions. And I believe it's not the case only for Georgia. We've seen the same problem happening in other countries as well. For example, when the Japanese Empire occupied Korea during the World War II, not long before the World War II, they also created lots of different institutions on the Korean Peninsula. These institutions were not welcomed by the Koreans because they were entirely different. And also there was a huge gray zone between these institutions and the actual Korean people. So I believe when institutions are installed from beyond, not from within, when these institutions do not have a chance to evolve, to adapt to the needs of the specific community, specific country, specific nation, that's why we have the problem with trust. In Georgian case, as I have already mentioned, we didn't have Western style institutions for the entire existence of the Soviet Union. In 1920s, Georgians were able to create the first republic, which was a wonderful experiment, with newly created institutions that were created from within by Georgians for Georgians, considering European experience. In the Soviet Union, all the institutions were created from Moscow and they were controlled entirely by Moscow. So there was no autonomy, there was no space for adaptations, there was no space for evolution of those institutions, which eventually resulted in the collapse of the Soviet Union and allowed Georgia to gain independence back. Since 1990s, we've also been building those institutions, but we've been mostly looking at the design of Western institutions. And we tried to simply take those institutions and plant them into Georgian soil. But the problem is that without proper adaptation, these institutions also have not proven to be resilient. And that's why when political actors, political forces are trying to use those institutions in their own interests, those institutions are not resilient enough to support their own interests and to protect themselves. So that's why there is a big necessity to build trust between institutions and ordinary citizens. Ordinary citizens should understand that those institutions exist to support them, to solve their problems, and not vice versa. Because in the Soviet Union, people existed to support institutions, not institutions existed to support people. So we need to overcome this mental challenge that we have in our minds, and also to understand properly how institutions operate. Because for many people in Georgia, institutional operation is not understandable. For people living in mountainous regions, the ways how Parliament of Georgia operates or the way how the Supreme Court operates are not fully understandable because nobody took enough time to explain how those institutions are supposed to work to those people. And when they don't see, they see that there is government sitting in Tbilisi ordering those people to do something. And that's why there is a question, why should they do it? That's why there is a necessity to go on a local level. That's why institutions should be able to create resilient structures on local self-governance level. And that's why when we're talking about Georgian example, we always emphasize the necessity to create municipal institutions, to make them as strong as possible, to give them as much power as we can, and eventually to ensure that those institutions have a chance to evolve. And I believe that there is the same problem all around the world. Many institutions have been specifically designed to face specific problems that were quite resilient and relevant, maybe 1920s, 1930s, 1940s. But the problems change. Our perception of problems changes. And the institutions should also be able to change together with those problems. Institutions should continue evolution. We shouldn't say that we have an institution that has worked for 100 years, so let's just keep it. New challenges emerge, new institutions appear, and new problems appear, and institutions have to catch up. If institutions do not catch up, in that case, we won't be able to properly deal with those problems. And then there is another question, what do we need institutions then?
Thank you very much. I think I don't know whether you will agree with me or no, but to summarize what you said, I guess I can say that turns out that in post-Soviet and post-colonial countries, the lack of trust is not a new thing. It has been there for years. And if we try to think about the reasons, I guess the main reason that you mentioned is that the institutions did not grow there. The public institutions did not grow in those countries, but they were kind of transplanted. And the transplantation did not work properly because there was this misunderstanding between the culture, like local relations, local human relations and perceptions, and the idea of the institutions that rose somewhere else. And about another reason that I was thinking while listening to you, and you like slightly mentioned it, is that what is said, what is the idea, what is the concept doesn't always correspond to the reality. Like people can think and say something like it was in the during the Soviet time when the ideology was something, but then there was the reality, which we can say gray market, or I don't know, the relations between people that was totally about different thing. And you, like people that grew in post-Soviet countries, they know that you can say, okay, the rule is this, but in between us, we can do differently. So, and I have an impression that even in Western countries right now, we have an issue like that, when the public discourse is about one thing, but when you go beyond Facebook or other social media, or when you turn off the TVs, like real life, the institutions, the rules are not as radical, as dramatic, as ideologized as it is spoken about. What can we think about the solutions? Do we need to do something about that, or we can just let things be and try to adopt to them? And if you think we need to do something, what would be your suggestion? Like what people need to learn, what new relations we need to establish between each other, how the institutions should be changed. And overall, if you don't mind, would you touch also upon the issue? Is it about lack of trust, or it is about also trustworthiness of these institutions? Because you mentioned that life is changing faster than democratic institutions or governmental institutions can catch up, and they don't transform as fast as I guess they have to.
Well, it's a wonderful question. So first of all, we need to continue adaptation. Western institutions have already shown to be extremely, tremendously resilient. They were able to overcome the first communicational revolution when we had radio and mass communication tools. So probably they will be able to adapt to the new reality of social media, of social networks, etc. It just takes time, and we need not to stop adaptation. We don't need to be afraid to adapt. We need to embrace technological progress that we see, and we need to think of new ways how to adapt to it. There's absolutely no way of any person being able to stay in the same situation, same position of development where this person was yesterday. Same is with institutions. Direct communication, ability to speak to persons on the other side of the globe, has proven to be a blessing, but it also created challenges. So the work of politicians today should be to embrace the blessings, to be able to use the additional resources we have, but at the same time to think of the new ways how to adapt to the new challenges. Now, how to adapt is a very long-lasting topic. And I believe that every culture and every country should be able to adapt in its own unique way. There is a wonderful Dahrendorf's hypothesis, according to which there should be different ways of economic policy for different countries, for different societies and different cultures. In Europe, we see outstanding amount of political diverseness. We see different institutions in different countries able to tackle problems that those countries have in their specific communities. I believe that we should continue working in this direction, because I think the challenges that Georgia faces are entirely different from the challenges that France faces, or challenges of France are entirely different from the challenges of Azerbaijan, and so on. There are different countries with different challenges. But even in countries that seem to be similar or seem to be facing similar challenges, the ways to solve those challenges can be entirely different. And this diversity is, in my opinion, a very good thing, which allows politicians to create different ways to tackle different problems. We were talking about social media. For example, in Finland, we're witnessing that there is already a very nice way to deal with fake news and fake media. This way might not work in Georgia because we have different institutional experience, but something else might be able to work here. And that's why this necessity to keep this diversity is crucial on one hand. And on another hand, we should not be frightened of institutional evolution. Institutions that were designed 200 years ago will not be able to properly deal with current challenges. So that's why they need to adapt. And there is always a need of political will. Politicians need to embrace this new experience. They need to see the problems. They need to accept those problems. And when they accept those problems, they will be able to think of new solutions. So in brief, my suggestion will be don't be afraid to adapt and be able to see the problem.
Thank you very much, Georgi. And last question, which can be a bit provocative. So do you think that the required changes are as much that we can still talk about the same democratic institutions or governmental institutions, or it is about entirely new institutions? I mean, are we in a position when we need so many changes, or that it is more fair to say that we need something new?
I believe we definitely need something new. Technological progress has shown that we have lots of new tools, and we are able to directly communicate with the voters sitting in your own sitting room. That's why I believe institutions need to evolve. But again, to evolve properly and to adapt, they need to accept these new challenges. They need to see these new challenges, and they also need to see all the opportunities that technological development is providing us with. As soon as they see it, as soon as they embrace it, I believe political institutions, at least in the West, will be able to adapt properly. We just should not be afraid of change, you know. When many institutions were installed, nobody knew whether they would work. Nobody knew if a parliament would work, or if this parliament should have 2 chambers or maybe 3 chambers. They tested it. Some solutions worked, some solutions are now just forgotten. But I believe that we need to keep this willingness of change. We need to be able to see the change, and we also need to embrace it.
Thank you very much, Georgi. I think you described the situation well, and also I heard very positive attitude, like you don't only say that we need it, but you also sound that we can do that, which is really very nice. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for this interview. I hope it was interesting enough.
It was very interesting. Thank you very much.